everyone. I wanted to give a little introduction into who I am because I know a lot of you have been following along for the past couple of months during my shorts journey with all of my cooking. And then I want to tell you really why I started this channel, and that's kind of the whole point of this video. So I'm Abby. I'm married to my husband, Mitch. He's actually from Canada, and right now we reside in the United States. Together, we have our 5 cats, and we are so big into gardening, homesteading, really just being outside in general. I, of course, love to bake and cook, as I'm sure you have figured out if you've seen any of my shorts. We also really love animals and just nature in general. So now, as far as why I started my channel, this is really why I'm making this video, because it feels like I really need to discuss it. I started this channel a couple of months ago, and it was due to needing a creative outlet to get my mind off of the issues that we have gone through this year. 2025 has not been our year at all. Back my whole life, really, I was going to never be able to get pregnant. I've always been overweight. My weight is something I've always struggled with, which I'd really like to discuss in the future. But I just have always been told that because I'm overweight and because of some of my medical diagnoses that I will just have a really hard time getting pregnant. Well, my husband and I have been married since 2022, and we decided to finally start trying for a baby this year after my sister got married. For as long as I can remember, my sister and I have talked about having babies at the same time. So they got married in April, and we tried right after their wedding for a baby. I met with my doctor back in March to discuss getting pregnant and things that might help. And she said, well, you need to try for at least a year before we take any other routes. Jump forward to when my sister got married. A couple days later, I had been ovulating, which this, at least to my knowledge, was the first time I had ever ovulated in my life, because I do have PCOS, and so that causes irregular periods, irregular ovulation, and all of that. But leading up to April 2025, throughout the past 9 months before that, I had lost 95 pounds or so, all naturally. I was eating 1 meal a day and just watching what I eat and exercising a little bit more than usual. I was really in the best physical shape of my life, and I had ovulation happen naturally during the month of March and April, and I couldn't believe that it was happening, because again, as I said, I've never remembered ovulation happening before. So my husband works out of town, and he was actually home this week. Somehow it all lined up. It felt honestly magical that, he was home for my sister's wedding, he was home for my ovulation, and it felt like the right time. Move forward to a couple weeks later in May, and my body just felt different. I could tell that something was just different. And so I took a pregnancy test, and it looked like it was negative, but I'm like, maybe there's a little bit of a line there. I'm not joking when I tell you we probably took 50 pregnancy tests over the course of 3 weeks, because I swore on each one that I kept seeing a line. Well, I tried all different brands, and the line kept getting darker and darker and darker, and it didn't matter what test I took. It was still very faint, but the line was still there. So a couple weeks into May, I finally decided to take a digital pregnancy test, and it said pregnant. The night before, we had a tree fall in our backyard, and my husband was outside cleaning it up, and I run outside barefoot with this pregnancy test in my hand, showing him that the digital test said pregnant. It was the happiest that I have ever felt. For those couple of days where we had just found out I was pregnant, I had no anxiety. I didn't feel depressed. I was happy, just 24/7, just because I could not believe that it had happened on our first attempt. And especially after being told my whole life that I wouldn't be able to get pregnant naturally. This was finally the point where I felt like my husband could believe it, because even though we could see the tests where there were lines on them, the lines were still pretty faint. And so my husband had some he felt like he couldn't believe it until he saw that digital test. And so once we saw that digital test, it was like, okay, this is actually happening. We knew it was early, but we ended up telling my parents, and because his parents are in Canada, we called them and then we're like, hey, a tree fell in our backyard. We want to show you. We can't believe how big it is. We're like, we're going to send you a picture, as we were on the video call with them. And it was a picture of the digital pregnancy test. Of course, they want grandkids so bad. This would have been their first. And they were crying and we were crying. And then the next day we had my parents come over. I'm very, very close with my dad, and my mom and my dad show up, and I hand my dad the positive pregnancy test, and he starts crying. And all around, everybody was just so excited because it's the first grandkid for everyone. I'm the first, daughter, niece, and granddaughter. So this would have been the first grandchild of the family. So everybody just couldn't believe it. And actually, my grandma was the first one to find out I was pregnant, because she just randomly showed up right after I had taken that digital pregnancy test. And so I had told her immediately. She was the first one to know. Flash forward to a couple of weeks. I'm now about 5 weeks pregnant, and I'm sitting outside in our yard. I start getting these cramps. And I'm not talking a period cramp. I'm not talking just brush it off. I'm talking, I am in so much pain, I feel like I am dying. I sit down in the yard, and I'm a firm believer of grounding yourself and putting your feet in the grass and all of that. And so I'm I take my shoes off, I'm sitting in the grass, I'm touching the grass, I'm on the phone with my sister, and then I call my mom, and I'm like, something is not right, because these cramps are just so bad. And my mom's like, well, let's just hope everything's okay, because my husband also wasn't home at the time. He was 13 hours away working. I call him and I'm like, you need to come home because something is not right. And so he's on his way home. I didn't want to go to the hospital by myself, and I really didn't want to take my mom or my dad or my sister. I wanted my husband, my comfort person. So I was talking to my mom, and she's like, just try to make it through the night. Just monitor if anything is going on, or if anything's happening. Next morning, my husband gets home, and we end up going to the ER that morning. I believe it was a Monday morning. They get me right in. And at this point, also, mind you, once I had found out I was pregnant, I called my OB and I was like, hey, I need an appointment. Well, they won't see you till you're 6 or 8 weeks. And I know that with PCOS, we tend to have low progesterone. So I was like, I really would like to come in sooner and just have everything checked out. And they're like, well, no, we can't see you till you're, a couple weeks along. That's a whole different story. Anyways, we end up going to the ER. They get us right in. They do all kinds of blood work. They do an internal ultrasound, an external ultrasound, but I'm still having all of these cramps. There was a point where I felt so sick that I was going to vomit. I was nauseous. I was so hot. Then they end up telling me that the baby has a heartbeat. That I'm just over 5 weeks along, but the heartbeat was 96. They thought everything was okay. I wasn't bleeding. I didn't have a temperature, nothing like that. They send me home, tell me to follow up with my OBGYN and just monitor my symptoms. Now, I also want to point out that the day before the hospital on Sunday, it was really cold outside, but I was so hot. My face was so red. I felt like I couldn't cool off, even though it was freezing cold outside. And I made a trip to my cousin's house to pick up some flower bulbs from her. And she commented and was like, "Are you feeling okay? Your face is really red. Like, are you sure you're okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then I was like, "I know this is really early, but I think it's just due to my hormones because I'm actually pregnant." I tell her all about being pregnant, and she was so excited for us. And foreshadowing, I think that was the point where things started going downhill, because even other people were realizing that something was off compared to how I usually am. So anyways, after the ER visit, we come back home and, we just kind of monitor for a couple of days. Well, the cramps kept getting worse. Then I started bleeding. So I call my OBGYN and they're like, "It's nothing to worry about. Some bleeding is normal during pregnancy." Of course, I trust them because they're the professionals. I've never been through this before. Well, then comes Wednesday, and the bleeding was more bleeding than I have ever experienced. The pain and the cramps were so much closer together. I go to the hospital again because my OBGYN will not see me. And again, I have ultrasounds and everything done again. This one was so frustrating because, and I know that the ER was busy and I know that mine was not a life-threatening emergency, but I have all the procedures and I have all the blood work done, never got to meet with a doctor, never got put in a room. We ended up leaving because after my ultrasound, I got the results in my patient portal and there was no heartbeat detected. The baby was gone. I had had a miscarriage. The pain that I was feeling was the labor of expelling the pregnancy. Why I was never informed of this at the ER, I don't know. I don't know why they never mentioned like the cramping could be a sign of a miscarriage. I don't know why they never checked my progesterone. There's a lot of things that I don't understand why they did or why they didn't tell me that was a possibility. Anyways, my OBGYN finally followed up with me after I told them I had had a miscarriage, and nothing was taken seriously. They didn't believe that I had had a miscarriage. I had talked to my OB a month prior saying that we were trying to get pregnant, and I go in after my miscarriage and she's like, "Were you even trying to get pregnant?" I just felt like it was a whole joke to them, like it just didn't matter. But the worst part of this whole miscarriage was not only losing our first baby, but it's the fact that my sister and I, we were only 2 days apart. Our due dates were 2 days apart. We were both due at the very beginning of February of 2026. We had had about a week and a half of time where we both knew we were pregnant, and we were the only ones who knew. Because she didn't end up telling our parents or anything right away. I was the only one who knew. So we had this week of just pure, just joy and happiness and honestly just disbelief, because what are the chances that we got pregnant at the same time and we're 2 days apart and this is what we've wanted our whole life? And later we found out that the cousin that I had mentioned that I went to see before I had gone to the hospital, she was also like a day or two apart from us as well. I think that has been the most devastating part of all of this is I was due first, my sister was due, and then our cousin was due, or it's our cousin's wife, sorry. We were both going to be having babies together. They were going to grow up together. They were going to be the first babies of the family. And it was all like ripped away from us because no one would believe me that something was wrong and that I wanted like my hormone levels checked and I wanted things to be taken more serious, and just nobody did. And I'm not saying that the miscarriage could have been prevented, but if my OBGYN would have listened to me in the first place, when I had first found out I was pregnant and had brought me in and done hormone testing, maybe the progesterone would have prolonged the pregnancy. And so there's all these what ifs that have been going through my mind for the past 6 months. It has been a very, very hard healing process because I also have not ovulated since. I did find a new OBGYN, so that's one of the good things. And he said, as soon as you get pregnant next time, we will start you on progesterone immediately to help support the pregnancy. He's willing to put me on fertility medication if we need it. But this is it's just been one of the worst experiences of my life. I was a nanny for 8-9 years, and I love kids. I've always loved kids. I'm really good with kids. My husband, his whole life has wanted kids. And it's like we had it. It was right there. And then it was just ripped away from us in so many ways. I love my sister to death, and I've had to go through this entire mourning process in a parallel way to also supporting my sister and her husband while they get to keep their baby. It's a really weird crossover because you are mourning so hard for yourself and for what you lost, but you're also so excited and happy for your sister who is going to make you an aunt and make my husband an uncle. And we're happy because they got to keep their baby. But it's so unfair, and I've had to struggle a lot with jealousy also, because I look at it in terms of facts where I've been around so many kids. It was my whole job at one point for almost a decade of my life, and my sister's never even changed a diaper. We're trying to look at it in the sense that if she ever needs help, I won't have a baby yet, so I'll be available to help her if she needs it. But that is the whole reason that I started this channel. I'd gone through a lot of therapy, a lot of crying, a lot of just trying to process what has happened. And I love to bake and cook. It is like my favorite thing to do aside from being outside. So after the miscarriage happened this summer, I was at least still able to stay busy with our garden and canning and just basic homesteading stuff. But then it's like fall and winter came, and there's not as much to do outside. Things are a lot slower, and that gives your mind a lot more time to race and worry. So I had to find something to fill my time since I couldn't be outside as much, staying busy. And that's where YouTube came in. My husband was like, you cook and bake all the time anyways. Why don't you just film it and put it on YouTube and see what happens? And I just feel like it has been so good for me. It gives me something to focus on. It gives me something to get excited about. I get to interact in the comment section. And it's really kept my mind occupied and I think really contributed to my healing process. Anyways, that is where this has all come into play. I'm hoping at the beginning of the year to start losing weight again, because after the miscarriage, I did gain about 20-25 pounds, just honestly from depression. There's no easy way to say it other than I have just been so depressed and so sad, and I needed something to keep me busy. My husband works. Right now I'm in school, so I don't currently work. So really in the winter I have a lot of free time, but I could do a whole deep dive into my miscarriage and like specific details and dates and tests they've ran and all of that. But my whole point of this is that this is the reason I started my YouTube channel, but also if you are going through a miscarriage or have gone through a miscarriage, or if you're planning on getting pregnant and you're worried about a miscarriage, just make sure you trust your doctor and make sure that your doctor listens to you, because you know your body better than anyone else. The entire time from the time I found out I was pregnant until my miscarriage, I was taking pregnancy tests and I was calling my doctor, my family doctor, to have my HCG levels checked, because again, I just felt like things were not progressing the way they should be. My HCG was kind of doubling at first, and then it kind of stopped doubling, but it was still growing. I would say even a week or two before my miscarriage, how I felt when I was first pregnant, where I just knew I was pregnant, is also how I felt before my miscarriage, that I just knew something was wrong, something wasn't right, something felt off. So find a doctor that you trust, who will listen to you, who doesn't brush you off as anxiety ridden or crazy or whatever the case may be, and really just advocate for yourself, because you know yourself better than anyone else. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching and listening to me cry over my miscarriage story. It's something that is so near and dear to my heart, and I think it will always pull at my heartstrings. So that's all. If you have any requests for cooking videos, baking videos, story times, any other information about my miscarriage, let me know in the comment section and I will be happy to film one. Thank you guys. Bye.